Cannabis Health Radio. I'm Ian Jessup.
And I'm Corey Yelland.
Peter O'Toole is a legal cannabis farmer and oil maker in Michigan. He is known as Uncle Pete, and he's helped well over 1,000 patients with various ailments and diseases. And he's also the co-founder of Cannabis Camp. Last August, the police raided 2 of his grow ops, and he, his wife Cristy, and Jenn Cook are facing felony manufacturing charges. And Peter O'Toole joins us from Michigan to tell us his story. Peter, thanks for doing this. Appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having us on.
Now, take us back to last summer and tell us exactly what happened.
It all started with a knock on our door here at home in Prudenville, Michigan. Cristy and I were not home. Our children were, and some detectives from the SWAT team or the local drug team, drug narcotics enforcement team, I guess, or however you want to word that, showed up at our door and basically tried to bully their way in our door verbally with our 20-year-old son home. And fortunately, he was able to ward them off. They didn't have a warrant. He knew the routine, and they left. But there was a friend of ours that had been raided and arrested here about a month before that owned a dispensary local here. And we felt that it was kind of tied to that investigation. So at that time, we moved our garden from here in Prudenville up to a place called Boys Blank Island, where we had a second home. When we did that, the police were fully aware of it. We heard it on the scanner, them speaking of it, and had friends that had called us that heard it on the scanners and things like that. So once again, we were pretty aware that we were under investigation and the heat was on, so to speak. Now, with that being said, we're 100% legal caregivers here in Michigan, which allow each one of us, myself, my wife Cristy, and Jen here, to grow 72 plants. That's 12 for us and 12 for each of our 5 patients that are connected to us through the registry system. So there we are on the island. We had the grow. I had the grow at the island home, the summer home that we had. And then a couple miles down the road on the island, we had rented another building for my wife to have her garden at. We can't have 2 caregivers growing in the same location. So we rented a nice little pole barn and we set it up, and she had her grow there. So it was about 2 months after that initial knock on the door that we were raided up there on the island. And that happened as a result of well, I'm going to let Jen tell this story, actually. She was the one that was present. They waited until Cristy and I were on vacation in Las Vegas and decided to come and give Jen and her mom a visit while her mom was up there visiting. So I'm going to let Jen tell the story of the raid there.
This is Jenn Cook.
My business partner and the co-founder of Seed to Cure.
Okay, Jen, go ahead.
All right. Well, my mom and my brother had come up to the island. It was August, so it was a beautiful summer. We have a boat up there, and we went out cruising around the island, and we're playing in the water, went over to Mackinac for the day, had lunch, dropped my brother off in our own personal boat back in Sheboygan, which is across the water from where the island is. And on our way back home to the island, Coast Guard decided to stop us for what they called a routine safety check. Well, this was probably 25 yards outside of the island marina, and while they were checking the boat, they conveniently said it would be easier to just go to the dock. So we went to the dock, and there's the island sheriff, and it was real plain to me that it was not an accidental stop, but rather a planned stop. And they proceeded to detain us for about 16 hours, and by about 9 in the morning, they raided both of our legal grows on the island. And took down the plants, the lights, everything there, and here we are now, 6-8 months later, looking at the charges from them.
So you were held in custody for 16 hours while they went about doing what they were doing?
Me and my mom and my mom's best friend sat on the concrete dock at the marina for a good 10 hours and then spent the last 6 in the house.
Did they give any reason why this was undertaken?
We just got the discovery, which is what you get, basically the case that's presented against you here in the last couple of days. I haven't even seen it with my own eyes yet. But in that discovery, they tell you basically what the charges are against you and how and why. And in there, it states that we were under investigation, and there's a lot of, bogus claims where they felt that there was going to be a whole lot of marijuana on that boat, I think is what they thought. And there wasn't. There was only a half ounce of personal marijuana that Jenn had on there that she was completely legal for. So, in other words, I think they had us pegged out to be some really big fish doing some really big things, and we're just not, to their disappointment.
In Michigan law, you are a caregiver. You're allowed 72 plants. Are you allowed to transport your product anywhere?
Yes. In Michigan, the only rule about marijuana as far as where it needs to be kept or anything is, as far as growing goes, it needs to be in a locked and closed facility. Now, outside of that, we're not allowed to have it on school property or within 500 feet of a school, I think maybe is the rule. And obvious things like that. But as far as cannabis itself, they actually had some legislation that was in effect that said we had to keep it locked in a box in our trunk if we were transporting it. But that actually got thrown out by the Supreme Court. We don't have to lock our medication up any more than anybody has to lock up their morphine or whatever prescription medicine they're on. So as far as transporting plants, they can only be transported by the caregiver that's responsible for those plants. And so on. So when we transported the plants from A to B, that was 100% legal transport. There's a few things that they're using as an excuse to investigate and to pursue this thing. But, this law affords us protection from things like search and seizure and arrest and all the things that we've been through in the last few months.
Prior to the raid, did you have any indication the police were looking at your operation?
Yes. Like I said, they knocked on the door and tried to get in here with two members of the local SWAT team.
But what about before that, though? Did you have any indication that they were maybe eyeing your operation?
Well, other than the fact that I've been through two cases before, and I'm very well known, as we've kind of stated already, through my work with cannabis oil and so on and so forth. So I guess, I've always felt I've been on the radar, so to speak. But nothing indicating that we had something coming down immediately.
Pete, are there any other caregivers under the same, facing the same circumstances that you and your wife and Jenn are?
Absolutely, and it's been going on since 2008 when this law came to effect. My first cases were called test cases. There's no test about it. It's the real deal. But when you're the first one in a county to acquire these charges and represent the new law, they refer to it as a test case. Well, when I beat those two cases, and I beat them both hands down for the same charges, manufacturing, there was certainly a feeling of accomplishment and that they weren't going to come back and do the same thing again. A lot of the work that I did in the first couple of years as an activist, it was that first case that kind of sprung me into being an activist. So the first couple of years before Cannabis Camp and before all the CD Cure and that, I went to court dates all over the state in different counties, me and a small group of people. And we educated not just the defendants, but the prosecutors, the judges, the lawyers. We'd go in with copies of the law highlighted. We'd explain to them the different parts of the law, what a Section 8 acquittal was, what a Section 8 hearing was. In other words, if they didn't know how to acquit, they weren't going to. So we'd lay the roadmap out in front of them. And because they don't really like to listen to words too much from people that aren't in their club, we just use things like highlighted information, in the law itself. And they seem to catch on to that pretty well.
What is a Section 8?
Section 8 defense, first of all, there's two different ways that this law protects us. Section 4 defense says that we're protected if we're within the scope of the act, meaning we're not on the school property and things like that, like I discussed before. We're not outside of our limits of the 72 plants and things of this nature. Section 4 says that when I come in contact with law enforcement and cannabis is involved, and I present my medical marijuana card with an ID, a valid state ID, that I am afforded certain protections under this act. In other words, this is the intent of this act, is to avoid search, seizure, arrest. And those are the exact words that are written into the law. So they're to presume that any marijuana they come in contact with is for medical use. And in the definition of medical use, that includes cultivation, manufacturing, processing, just about anything you can imagine you can do with marijuana. So, in other words, once they see these cards, there's no reason for them to presume that there's more than 72 plants behind these closed doors. There is no right for them to come in and inspect and count. Now, if they have a witness that tells them that I have more than 72 plants in a room, then they have information that would lead them to get a warrant and to believe that I have more than 72 plants. But without that information, or without evidence, in other words, of there being a crime, they're not supposed to mess with us, is the bottom line. And that's Section 4 defense. Now, when Section 4 fails us, like it did in this case, as soon as Jenn showed them the medical marijuana cards on the boat, they should have left her alone and went on. They didn't need to detain her for hours on end and manipulate her into going back to the house and so on and so forth. Those are just police tactics. They do this all the time. So, in other words, there was no presumption of medical use in accordance with the law. So, so now Section 8 comes in, and Section 8 says when Section 4 fails, that we can, as long as we're within the scope of the act and intent of the act, that we, in these exact words, cannot be committed of any crime involving marijuana. And I'm going to repeat that, any crime involving marijuana. So it's kind of a blanket coverage after the fact. Now what we're going to be defending ourselves with is what's called the Section 8 defense, Section 8 defense, which will come up in the form of a Section 8 hearing. At that time, we've got to prove that we've got valid legal cards, our patients are valid, there's a valid relationship between the doctor that signed the patients and the patients, and there should be a straight-up acquittal, just like there has been in the two other cases that I've fought. So there's really, from the outside looking in, there's no way for them to win this case, and it's a shakedown from Jump Street.
Yeah, I think you're a marked man. I think because you beat them twice previously, the cops are out to get you. And they're going to do everything they can to try and find something to charge you with and essentially harass you. Let me give you an interesting parallel story that happened in Vancouver, British Columbia. There was a licensed, valid grower. The cops came in and said he was not growing his plants on his own property. They were off his property. And he said, no, they're on my property. And they said, no, you're growing off your property. They came in, cut down all of his plants. He brought a surveyor in. They surveyed the property, and the grower was right. He was growing on his own property. Yet the cops took it upon themselves to eliminate all of his product. And I think once you beat the cops, not once but twice like you have, once you educate the public on the laws with respect to marijuana in Michigan like you have, they're out to get you. And I think you will face police harassment until someone just backs off and said, listen, this guy is a valid grower. He's not to be charged anymore. What do you think?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I'm not alone here. There's a lot of us that have been through this over and over again. And even worse, more and more new ones every day. On that island in particular, you're talking about a place that's, roughly 50 square miles, if I had to guess off the top of my head, with a population of maybe 100 people, less than 100 people in the wintertime. Out of those 100 people, there's probably 30 of them that are growing marijuana and have been for 25 years and, illegally. And I'm maybe not the same ones in the same place, but in general, this has been a place where growers have resided, where the law enforcement is nil. The sheriff's not even there 6 months of the year. He's gone in the wintertime because he can't take the ferry back and forth to the island. Things of this nature, a lot of the locals set up stills and they push the limits in a lot of ways, but essentially there was no law enforcement there until they come dropping out of the sky. If you had too big of an operation going or something like that. So I don't know. I guess I kind of got lost in my point here, but the point is the only ones that are raiding on that island are the legal ones. We were on the main road. We contacted the sheriff. We said, we're legal growers. This is our location. Come on over. Check it out. Anytime you want. You want to pull in my driveway, you're welcome to come in my grow, count my plants, check. I've been raided twice before. I know this law better than most. so on and so forth. An open invite to law enforcement on the island that was denied time and time again because he didn't want to get involved, just like he didn't want to get involved with any of the illegal activities going on that island. With that being said, I think that it goes beyond. And here's an example. They busted a guy for dealing heroin here in northern Michigan, and rather than take him to jail or arrest him, they made him a snitch to go in and buy from a legal medical marijuana dispensary to try to set them up. So they're giving up heroin charges to go after legal caregivers. If that doesn't say it all, I don't know what does.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a stupid situation in the province of Alberta where the RCMP came in, raided this woman's home, and confiscated, you know how many plants? One plant.
One plant.
And they charged her.
I just read about that. She was an older lady, too, wasn't she? Real old?
Well, depends how.
Yeah, it depends what side.
It's all relative.
Depends on what side of the compass you're looking at there.
I thought that the one I read was like in her 80s, like 87.
Yeah, that's right. So how did she? How did
attempted a recovery, right?
That's right. I think the police, people say, well, the police are just doing their job. No, they're not doing their job. Their job is to protect the public. And nobody has ever died from marijuana. No one has ever had any harm come to them as a result of consuming marijuana. So, for Christ's sake, just leave people alone who are law-abiding citizens. What does your lawyer feel about all this?
In my lawyer's own words, Mackinac County is about to get an education that they're not going to like.
Good. It just floors me because, Pete, you and I talk, off and on sort of thing, that the cops are getting away with doing this time and time again. I mean, here's the law in black and white that says if you're legal, you're allowed to do this. I mean, I'm well aware that you guys dot every I and cross every T 2 or 3 times over. You're definitely within the letter of the law and then some. And yet they're wasting their time going around busting law-abiding citizens. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense to us either. We've had more people keep saying to us, well, you must have done something wrong. I'm going to smack the next person that says that to me. Well, how can the cops just do that? You must have done something wrong. People don't understand that the police go where they want and they do what they want, and it's guilty until proven innocent is what it is for us right now.
Mm-hmm.
You can walk out on the highway and any highway in Michigan right now and find people exceeding the speed limit, which is breaking the law, which is far more dangerous than anything you guys have ever done.
Absolutely.
So how are you going to I realize that when you hire a lawyer, lawyers can be expensive. How are you funding all this? Take us through that.
Well, Jennifer just set up a Go Get Funding account. We tried to do GoFundMe, and they don't accept legal. Yeah, they don't accept legal funds or legal fundraising. So we're on a site called Go Get Funding, and we have been sharing it on all of our pages. I know that Corey has shared it for us too on her page, and we've raised $1,050 so far.
Well, how about if we put that up on our Cannabis Health Radio website as well, and our Facebook page?
That would be great. I will make sure that I get you the links for them. It is the Freedom Defense Fund on gogetfunding.com and seedtocure.org. It is also there, too. You can find the link.
Okay. Have you talked to other experts outside of the legal community about this and had any of their opinions as to what has transpired in Michigan with respect to your legal issue? I'm thinking of those people who have a history of dealing with the police in various jurisdictions around the United States.
There's organizations out there like the ACLU and things of this nature, but they just don't tend to get involved with the marijuana thing, I don't think, unless there's something going on that I'm not aware of. It'd be nice, for many years now, not just on a legal aspect, but Corey, you can relate to this. When you think somebody in the medical community would step up and, acknowledge that something's going on here that's worth looking at,
Yeah, that would be nice.
How is it possible that people like us can save our own lives with such a simple method, or however you want to word that, go on to help thousands of other people and simply for a humanitarian type effort and then be persecuted by our local police? I mean, it's maybe you're not being persecuted, but I sure the hell am. I feel like I'm being nailed up on a cross. Here I am, a family man. I've been married for 21 years. I'm trying to raise my children. I'm trying to do what's right. The day that I realized that I could grow marijuana legally, so I thought, and I was never so excited in my life. I've been wanting to do this since I was a teenager, but because I was married with children and because it was against the law, I knew I couldn't do that. It was a risk I wasn't willing to take. So, to be raided or arrested within 30 days of getting my card the first time and then catch a raid within 2 months after that here in my home, and I'm talking about 6 years ago now, or 8 years ago, 7 years ago, that was a little disheartening. So to survive all that, come out acquitted, man, I was a rock star. I couldn't believe it. It was all right. This shit works. I didn't see this one coming. After all these years, we've moved backwards, and you can see that as much as I can, Corey.
Yeah.
The movement made some progress. We got a whole lot of places doing some pretty neat shit, but more people are being arrested, and this is what it comes down to: more people are being arrested today than they were when this law came into effect. And every piece of this legislation is designed to keep those arrests at a maximum, to allow that cash flow to continue going to the Michigan State Police and the government,
What's Dr. Melamede's input on this?
If there's one person on this planet that's more pissed off about this than us, it's probably Dr. Bob.
Yeah.
And that's because just like you, he knows us personally, and he knows us well. I don't even want to try to articulate Dr. Bob's words. That's not a verb.
Cristy.
Different show, Corey.
Pete, has this prevented you from continue growing?
Absolutely not. They raided us on the island. They took my garden. They took Cristy's garden. And the first thing we did the very next day was fire up a garden right here at home again. That's why when we got raided 3 weeks after the island, we had a house full of plants. Now here in Roscommon County, where the raids were led by the Coast Guard as well, it was a continuation, in their words, of the raids up in the island. While we were raided by the same people, we weren't treated the same way. They did not seize the plants. They did not seize the equipment. All they took were some odds and ends from our house. Now, on the very same day, they raided Jenn's house, and they took some different things. They took all of her medibles and everything that looked like it had oil in it.
Anything they thought could possibly have oil in it, they took out of my medicine cabinet, out of my refrigerator, out of my grow room, including my 2015 taxes.
There's a piece of legislation that went into effect about 2 months after our raids. And that legislation was specifically pertaining to concentrates or cannabis oil. So before that, there had been some Supreme Court rulings that left a lot of opportunity for law enforcement to still pursue those things. So when we got raided on the island, they took our still, they took our oil, they took our, all the concentrates, they took the flour and the equipment and everything else too. But it's because of this specific piece of legislation that I'm talking about that we thought we were being raided anyway. We thought, well, they're trying to hit us because we're oil makers. It was then that before we turned around twice, that law had passed, and not only did it pass and allowed oil and put us very far within our limits, it was retroactive. So now I've got to wonder if this wasn't a snatch and grab before that legislation took effect.
I just want to be clear with people who are listening, and I know Ian alluded to it in your introduction. Jenn and Cristy and Pete aren't just growing for their own medical issues. They're very key players in people who help people. So basically, you guys are helping cancer patients and seizure patients and patients with PTSD, etc. And they've really, really given a lot and put in a lot of energy to help people over the years. So if anybody can help them in their cause, I'm thanking them or thanking you guys on their behalf.
Appreciate that, Corey.
I want to ask you, what happened to the patients that you were providing for when all this went down?
Well, they were without for a while because it takes a while to get your garden back going again, and they took every bit of medicine that we had ready and all the plants that we had growing. So our patients were without for a while.
Wow.
Few months. We didn't have flour for anybody. We didn't have flour to make oil for anybody. We were out of medicine, and that was not just me, Pete, and Jen. That was 18 people, because each one of us is allowed 5 patients. So that's 6 of us times 3 is 18 people that were without medicine.
And many, I assume, in life and death situations.
Well, we deal with patients that are dealing with things like brain cancer and everything from brain cancer to diabetes. So I think life is life threatening.
Life is life threatening. Yeah.
But yeah, we've got serious patients and real patients that we deal with. And with that being said, we weren't able to provide, but because we're so well known and because we're well known for being generous and helping so many other people out, there were certainly some individuals that stepped up to the plate to help a lot of these patients out while we weren't able to provide. And while I can't mention names for obvious reasons, I can certainly send a shout out and a thank you to all the support that we have had. If it wasn't for the people that are behind us, this would be a lot more painful.
Do you know what? You 3 are helping people. You're saving lives. If you were bankers and involved in the housing crisis of 2008, you wouldn't have been charged at all. You would you'd be millionaires. You would scam people, and you would be free to roam the country in opulence. I mean, it's a crazy system. It's not only in the United States. It's in Canada. It's in the UK. It's all around the world, and it's based on bloody ignorance. That's all it is.
From the very beginning, we just. I set out for to find the truth about cannabis oil. Right away, I found out that there were a lot of players in the game, so to speak, a lot of middlemen and a lot of con artists. There was a lot of horrible things going on and a lot of sick people being treated poorly. So from the beginning, I tried to represent the simple truth about cannabis oil, the good and the bad. It doesn't work for everybody and so on and this kind of thing. But at the same time, we were certainly happy to share the successes that we were seeing as well. It's disheartening to feel like people want to put us in a cage for this. There's never been such an honest or sincere effort on my part in my life to do something just simply good for humanity. Not because I owed anybody anything, but because I felt I owed this plant and the universe something. It saved my life. When I was diagnosed with liver cancer and diabetes and congestive heart failure and hepatitis C all on the same day, I don't like to revisit the emotions that I went through for the next couple of weeks and the next couple of months. And, having to come home and tell my family that I had less than 5 years to live and things of this nature. And then to find out that this simple plant and this simple medicine can do all that it can do, and to watch it not only cure myself, but thousands of others is, it's a roller coaster ride. I've had some of the best highs in the world, the best good, witnessed some of the most wonderful things a person can witness, in my opinion, as far as medicine goes and things of this nature. And then we go through things like this that are the absolute pits of hell. Watching my children writhe in fear every time a cop rolls by this fucking house, or pardon my language, or, there's a permanent effect on you that you can't shake. And while we can, be tough and we can be strong and we'll stand up for our rights and we'll fight to the death over this shit, there's no doubt that we've been shaken to the core. And I don't know how to express the absolute disgusting behavior on behalf of our police, our judges, our prosecutors. It's an absolute circus to see what's going on inside these courtrooms, the lies, the way that these cops are willing to just straight up lie, cheat, and steal, to convict people that are doing nothing wrong to begin with. And I'm sorry, I'm going on a little bit of a rant here, but
no, I think it was an excellent rant. And give us one last plug as we wrap up the program. Give us a plug for your funding proposals.
GoGetFunding.com is the name of the site, and it's the Freedom Defense Fund. You can also find the link for it on seed2cure.org. That's seed, the number 2, cure.org. You're looking for the Go Get Funding link and help us with our legal fees. We would really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, the three of you, very much. Peter O'Toole, Cristy O'Toole, and Jenn Cook, and we wish you all the best, and we know you're going to beat this for the third time. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us on, Ian. We appreciate it. Thank you, Corey.
Good luck, you guys, and nice talking to you, and looking forward to hearing that this is all over.
We do, too. Thanks, guys. We love you, man.
And that's another edition of Cannabis Health Radio. Wherever you are in the world, thanks very much for listening.
You've been listening to the Cannabis Health Radio podcast. Visit our website, cannabishealthradio.com, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.